The scriptural reading this morning is from Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32. This is from the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, the story of the parable of the prodigal and his brother. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'"
So this week we're returning to the parables. We had a sharing our journey last week with our rising, and so that was a little bit of a break. And now we're back to these parables, which have these interesting interpretations given to us before we even read them. Do you notice how this parable is called the prodigal son? Yet nowhere in the parable does it mention the word prodigal. Basically, by putting that subtitle in the text of the Bible when we read it as a caption or something like that, it's telling us already that we must focus on the son who left and returned. And the son who left and returned was prodigal. He was extravagantly wasteful. That's a very Protestant interpretation, wouldn't you think? Wastefulness is one of those sins that we think of, if we're being good stewards of God's wealth or our own providence. We don't want to be wasteful. So if we look at the story from a slightly different perspective, which I do, there are some very interesting things that happen along the way. Basically, the father, and I call attention to the fact that it is the father, because unlike the other parables of kings and rulers, here we have a story that begins with a father, and we know that Jesus uses Abba or Father in the Lord's Prayer. So right away, we know that there's a different understanding of the relationship that's going to be happening in this story. The son takes all that is his from the father. The father grants him complete freedom. He embodies what he says to the elder son later in the parable, all that I have is yours. He gives his fair share. So then the son leaves, fails, and returns. There's a key word in the middle of that process, a key sentence. I don't know if you heard it, but I'm going to repeat it to you because it's so prominent to me. He came to himself. After all of the things that he had been doing, after all of the ways that he had been extravagantly wasteful, he came to himself. That was the moment that he began his return journey. How did he change? What was it that changed for him? Some of what happened was beyond his control. A famine came upon the land. But he came to himself. You could say that his return is the beginning of his redemption, in a manner of speaking. And when he returns, what does he receive? The exaltation of his father, the unconditional love that embraces him, that puts a cloak on him. He kills the fatted calf. And then the return also brings us in that second part of the story that it's almost as if the parable ends with the return of the one son, but then we go out to the field and we see the brother who hears of the return of his younger brother, and he is full of consternation. Now, preceding these parables in the 15th chapter of Luke is the story of the lost coin and the single lost sheep. And what we have in this series of parables, if Jesus had happened to have said these in succession, basically what we're saying is that what's lost and been found is of extreme value, but it's also the individual, the one coin, the one sheep, the one son. We have the reinforcement that each individual person is of immense value, of so much value that when they're lost, it's as if they're dead. When they return and they're found, it's as if they are now alive again. I think, in my reading of the story, that the father may have been wounded by the son that left and wasted his wealth, but he never brings that up with the son. And I think he's just as deeply wounded by the older brother. In a way, this isn't just the story of the one son, it's the story of both sons. That's why it's a little bit unfortunate that it's only called the story of the prodigal son. When the younger son leaves and fails and returns to himself, I would say his true self, recognizing his own worth, his own value, his own understanding of his ability to take his life into his own hands, to make decisions for himself, to be conscious of what he's doing. That return to himself is a moment of revelation and transformation. He is changed in ways that if he had stayed with his family, he would not have changed. He would not have learned what he learned without going on the journey that he took, where he spent the wealth of his father that was given to him. In a way, the whole family system is exposed. Think about it. The one son doesn't quite know the value and the work and the effort that produced the wealth. And so he leaves and he has to learn the value of that wealth on his own because he's not learning it in the family. So you could say that that's what he needs to learn. That's his side of the difficulty in the family. But what's the difficulty on the other side? The father has compassion, but clearly the eldest son, he may value the material wealth that his family had, but he has no compassion. In a way, none of that is exposed without the one son leaving and returning as a transformed person. If he doesn't go away, the family doesn't learn anything. The family doesn't learn, and the father's wisdom, even though he expresses that wisdom, how often do we hear the words of our father or mother the first time and understand what they mean? It takes our own experience to bring us back to those words later. It's almost like we get the lesson, then the experience. So then we then put the two together and truly learn. So what we have before the prodigal son, the wastefully extravagant son leaves, is this hidden weakness within the family, this hidden lack of understanding. What do we have after he returns? Well, we have the potential for the reestablishing of the relationships that exist, but with a new understanding, so that if they enter into the same kind of relationship, working side by side, valuing each other, loving each other, looking upon each other with kindness, then the strength of that family unit becomes stronger. We can look at it as if the Father is God and we're the prodigal son, and we leave God and we return. But there's so much more because we embody both sons in some way. We're not just extravagantly wasteful sometimes. We're also very stingy at times. We're not always compassionate. Sometimes we're a little bit harsh. So there's a lot of layers in this story. But one of the things that keeps coming back to me that I hear over and over is he came to himself. That most authentic part of himself that said, I can see myself now. I can see what I look like from outside of myself. It's revealed myself to me. And he's embraced his failure and his vulnerability. And where does he go to find wholeness? He returns to the relationships that he had in his family of origin. There are so many things that happen in a group or a community or a family. Now, if we were to expand our point of view on this and say, okay, let's look at a church, for instance, a group of people full of relationships. Sometimes people will leave and return. Sometimes people stay and are always present. And then along comes somebody like me. Now, I think I'm probably a lot like many pastors, but then I think sometimes the reaction I get from people is that I'm not quite like everyone. I'm a little different in some way. But what will transform this church? In other words, we're such a family system or a group system that we can stay stuck in those cycles of consternation for those people that don't get it. And we can be stuck in wastefulness in some fashion if we're not careful. When I was reading this story and contemplating what I wanted to say with a sermon, I think it kind of comes down to one statement, and that is the transformation of an individual changes a group. If any one person changes in some way and they live out that change, the whole group has to react. So the family has to react to the return of the Son. His transformation is key to the change of everything that's happening, the improvement, the strengthening of that family unit. I started thinking, well, this whole church depends on me changing in a certain fashion. Meaning when I come and I encounter you and you encounter me, whatever is different about me, whatever change that I can make in terms of the way I relate to you or I relate to the world makes an opportunity for us to be different. Now, we might say, is it valuable to be different? Maybe there's value in being the same. I'm kind of curious how many of you would raise your hand if I would say, do we want things to remain the same? Or do we want things to change? Now that's without knowing what the changes are. But it's so common for me when I encounter pastors and churches and the ones that I've served and the ones that I talk to, almost all of them want to change. At least in some way. They have things they want to do. And it takes so much effort to gather the whole group together to make meaningful change, to do something that everybody can embrace. But it's usually that one person that makes such a difference. When we talk about growing a church, I think about if we could grow by one, how much of a difference that would make. I think about Rover as he's heading out the door. Look how much has changed because of Rover. Look how much we depend on him and how much he's given to us since he joined the church. One person. The incredible power of one person to make a difference. We're not going to get everything right. But I wonder if in our failures, we can see those as the opportunity for transformation. I wonder if we can see something that changes inside of us individually as something that we can bring to this group in a way that carries us forward, that helps us see something in a different way. Understanding that there is the value of that single individual that's so valuable that we can leave everybody else and bring them back. Or that one coin that we turn over every table and chair and look behind every book in the bookcase to find it in our house. I'm kind of curious about what kind of change might occur for me that will change you in some way. And I'm 68 years old. In my family, when I was growing up, you stopped changing when you were 30. My parents believed that you learned pretty much all you were going to learn in your whole life by the time you were 30, that you were kind of set at that point. If you hadn't made it by then you weren't going to make it. If you were a success by then, you were going to be a success your whole life. Our ideas change. My brother stayed. I was the one that left. When I left, I took everything that I owned with me when I left. And I knew that I wasn't going to return. Not in the same way. I was just an 18-year-old young man that grew up in a small trailer. My dorm room was twice as big. My space in my dorm room was more than twice the space that I had growing up. Most people have their own individual rooms. They go to college and it's like they've downsized. I upsized. My brother stayed. He was the elder brother. He did all the work. Just like the story. I think that my family is still undergoing the change that I brought because I was so different from everyone. And those relationships have their strains. Those relationships have their strengths. And some of those relationships don't exist anymore. We're absent from each other. But it's still important to think about how we as an individual can be that change. And the funny thing is, I think that we have an impact that sometimes we don't really see. We're different. We go along. everything's smooth. And later on, you realized how much it meant to have that person in your presence, to have that person who had a little bit different perspective, to have that family member that could look through the lens of compassion at all of the troubles that seem to come about. And I look at each one of you and I think, what are you going to give to me? Not that you have to bring something to me, but just somewhere along the way, one of you is going to say something to me that's either going to show up in a sermon, or it's going to change something that we do at the church, or it's going to make me feel something that has an impact when I go out into the world. We give those things to each other continuously. And when we return to each other, it's worth celebrating. And I have so much gratitude for what you give to me. And I actually am thankful for what I try to give to you. I call your attention to the reflection. When we bring our true selves to each other, that's the gift. That's part of the gift that we give, that we grow into what our real capacity is, the real opportunity to see each other, to hear each other, and to love each other. Amen.